I would have felt more comfortable being a little bit to the left, being watched over by Martti, and not taking the big podium and pedestal, having the more modest one. I think that would have been the approach of Martti, but when a former president sort of shows that, you know, this is where you come, then I come here. It's really lovely to be here today, and I feel very honored and privileged to be here in Tanzania to share some memories of Martti with people who've worked with him over the years. And it was lovely to hear Marco's words as well, his memories of being a young boy here from 1973 to, 1977. Those are quite formative years of a youngster at any time, and we have a very sort of personal identity-based attachment to Tanzania. Why? For us, Martti's career actually began here. You know, I was smiling when I was reminded that he came here as an ambassador at the age of 23. Our ambassador is sort of shaking her head, thinking, you know, how is that possible? But it is an amazing time, and I think the reason it was so formative for Martti was that he developed strong relationships of trust with so many independence movements and their leaders, of course, including SWAPO from Namibia. And we believe that these relationships played a key role when the UN General Assembly appointed him as the UN Commissioner for Namibia in January 1977. It was because of the discussions he had had when Marco walked across the living room with some determination. And of course, only in July 1978 was he appointed as the special representative of the Secretary General to Namibia. And this was really, you know, his first touch or opportunity as an assignment as a mediator. So, you know, we're talking about a man who is less than 30 years and giving a colossal task of mediating peace and eventually independence in Namibia. And that's why it's so formative. Now, the interesting thing is that from Dar es Salaam, Martti ended up being a peace mediator who basically mediated peace in 6 different decades. I believe that the reason for his Nobel Peace Prize was that he is one of the few human beings in living memory or indeed in history who has mediated peace on 3 different continents. Namibia in Africa, Kosovo in Europe, and Aceh in Indonesia, Asia. And not only that, he did that with 3 different hats on. You know, the first hat was very much a UN hat. The second hat was when he was president of Finland, and the third hat was, of course, when he was running CMI, the Crisis Management Initiative, which he founded in the early 2000s after he left the presidency. And he quite often used to tell me that, listen, Alex, you know, I would have never become who I am was it not for Tanzania, or was it not for the opportunity he was given in the UN, and was it not for his status as the president of Finland. And I had the great privilege of being the chairman of the board of CMI for 6 years after Martti handed it over. And I feel that I've been sandwiched between the Ahtisaaris, because first it was Martti, then it was me, and then it was Marco. But I look at the organization right now and its transformation into a peace mediation foundation, that it's done really well for itself. The CMI has roughly 100 employees and is involved with anywhere between 20 to 30 conflicts at any given time. And I must say that the demand is much higher than what can be supplied. So I do think that, you know, his time here in Dar es Salaam was, and especially Namibia, I mean, he was inexperienced in Namibia. It was one of those things that people sort of gave this young man a mission impossible. But he learned so much from it that when he did Kosovo and when he did Aceh, he was very much a seasoned diplomat. Now, of course, by then, one of his big theses was that in peace negotiations or peace mediation, timing is everything. And sometimes you have to take the risk. But one of Martti's basic philosophies was also he would never take on a task where he thought that there would be zero chance of mediating peace. So throughout his career, you will not see him just jumping from one mediation to another. He took on the big dossiers where he genuinely believed that the job could be done. In the beginning, in his task in Namibia, he joked around and said that his job was to tour the African capitals twice a year and then go back to New York and report on the developments, which were often quite minimal. Now, had anyone else said this, it might have sounded a little bit cynical, but when Martti said it, he was able to say so with optimism. And I think this particular skill, in other words, the ability to find hope in places and issues where others did not, made him an exceptional mediator. Now, what I wanted to do today is to look at Martti Ahtisaari and his career from three different perspectives, because I think we can all draw lessons from it. The first one is Martti as a person. The second one is Martti as a mediation professional. And the third one is Martti as part of modern history and geopolitics. So if you first look at him as a person, I'd characterize him with three very simple words, which I personally like as well: empathy, optimism, and realism. He often described himself as an eternal IDP, so internally displaced person. He was born in Karelia, which at the time was part of Finland, and now, after World War II, became a part of the Soviet Union. It was a 10% of land that we lost in the Winter War and the War of Continuation. Happens to be the same region where my grandparents were born and where my father was born as well. But I think this sort of notion of an internally displaced person very much shaped his personality and worldview and contributed to his exceptional empathy. He was able to understand the emotions of the parties to a conflict and connect deeply with different types of people. And remember that in peace mediation, a lot of times it is about connection and about identity, that you show empathy to both sides, no matter what your fundamental feelings of the other side might be. And being an eternal IDP did not make Martti cynical or bitter. On the contrary, he believed that optimism is not only an attitude, but it's also a method. And I think sometimes in today's world, where we are quite easily prone to not only pessimism, but more fundamentally cynicism, which never leads to any solutions, I think we should take the lesson of optimism and empathy from Martti. He sort of understood that the way we see things has a significant impact on how they end up. So if you don't believe in a solution, you're never going to reach that solution. And this was his approach when he worked for more than 10 years for the independence of Namibia, wearing the different hats, and when often other people didn't believe that peace or independence was possible. Now, empathy and optimism were often combined with crude realism. And for some people, realism sounds a little bit harsh. We learn of theories of realism in international relations. But I don't think that for Martti it was that. He saw the world as it was and acted accordingly. So Martti never saw the world as he wanted it to be. He acted on the basis on how the world actually was. And I think that's one of the key qualities, not only in diplomacy, but in peace mediation. And that's, I think, what made him an exceptional mediator. Now, the good thing with Martti was that no matter what the conflict was, both parties always trusted him. So he never made the mistake of breaching the trust of the other party, whether in Namibia, Kosovo, or Aceh. He understood that trust is something that can be built and should be used wisely. While most of the time he was very easygoing, flexible, and funny. He made a lot of jokes. He made a lot of people laugh. But at the same time, he was able to choose the issues and situations where party needed to hear what is realistic and what is not. And at times, there were moments in peace negotiations when he got really mad. And as we all know, you don't want to see Martti Ahtisaari mad. When he banged his fist on the table, the parties realized that, okay, we've reached the point that perhaps it's best for us now to find a solution. But even in those situations, he was able to deliver unpleasant facts in a way that he felt felt almost like a gift to those receiving the message. And I just want to, take that thought and understand that now we live in a world where a lot of people don't want to face up to realities. If you have someone who can come up and say that, listen, we simply have to do this, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Israel, Palestine, whether it's Sudan, I think it's always very useful. Now, the second point about Martti I wanted to make was him as a professional mediator. The irony, of course, is that here we are talking about Martti Ahtisaari's legacy, and we always talk about CMI as a center of peace mediation, but Martti never saw himself as a mediator, right? He sort of looked at things from a different perspective, and he described his work as that of an honest broker rather than a mediator. And this meant that he took a very clear principled position from the very beginning. So he had a vision of what the end state of a conflict should be, and only then did he begin the process of exploring what was possible within the given framework. So, just through the three examples. So in Namibia and Kosovo, the principled position was independence. End of conversation. I go into this negotiation only if I know that I can achieve independence for Namibia and Kosovo. And he made that clear to the parties in Namibia, and he made it clear between the Kosovars and the Serbs. But in Indonesia, the starting point of the process was autonomy for the province of Aceh. So he went in there and told both parties that, listen, this is not about the independence of Aceh, this is about autonomy. And when, as a peace mediator, you start from that basis, I think it gives you a clear vision where you go. So from the beginning of the process, he was very, very clear that the only issue he was prepared to explore in Aceh was autonomy. And if the parties wanted independence, they would have to find someone else to do the job. And of course, once again, Martti on this one succeeded. He actually believed that the best way to gain trust was to be completely open with the parties about his intentions, and then the parties could decide whether he was up to the task. So in that sense, Martti was one of these, very honest, straightforward, no-nonsense guys. And these principled positions were not about ideology. I'm not saying he was agnostic to ideology, but he wasn't going in there portraying some kind of a political, ideological position and saying, well, because you're from the left or because you're from the right, I'm going to agree or disagree with you. Quite the contrary, his thinking was based on crude realpolitik assessment of the actual situation. So for Martti, the key condition for successful peace process was the alignment of the superpowers, and this set the basic parameters of the process. And I'm going to get to this in a second, but he looked at the global context, at that time, most of the time, either, Cold War or post-Cold War. And he felt that without the consensus by the superpowers, a sustainable peace is not realistic. So always had in mind, the big game was going on. And at the same time, Martti was very principled, so he wasn't, his realpolitik wasn't agnostic to values, but he was very principled about the idea that only the parties to the conflict can make a peace. So he never took the credit himself. He always said, I'm just here to find common ground between the two of you, and you are the ones who own the peace. And I think it's a very good position to have in all the conflicts today as well. You know, you can't have a peace mediator that bangs on his chest and said, I did the peace. No, the peace was done by the two parties involved. So as a mediator, I guess in his case as an honest broker, he could help the parties to explore the parameters of peace, but the parties had to make the final decisions. And this is the only way to ensure that peace is sustainable. And I want to remind everyone that the three key peace agreements that he negotiated, they have all been sustainable. You know, from the 1970s, from the 1990s, and from the 2000s to today. And these parameters were central to Martti's most important task. So the starting point was to find a solution that would maximize fairness and a sense of justice despite the parameters set by realpolitik. So in Aceh, this led to maximizing the various aspects of autonomy without giving independence to anyone. In Kosovo, it led to a model where the Serb minorities who were aligned with Serbia against the independence of Kosovo were given very broad minority rights in the constitution of Kosovo. My third and final point before I conclude is a short one, and that is Martti as part of history. Now, while some of the qualities and methods of his brokering or mediation are universal, the work of Martti is also a big part of history and, of course, international relations. So the independence of Namibia is closely linked to the end of the Cold War and apartheid. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the struggle between ideologies lost its relevance, at least for a while. So there was more space to think about what was actually good for people and their future. So the timing was perfect in the sense that I'm not saying we moved into an non-ideological world, but at least the systemic rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States, between communism and capitalism, wasn't there anymore. In Aceh, the peace agreement was signed in the aftermath of 9/11, Afghanistan, and Iraq. At that time, there was a strong global consensus on the need for the limit of the threat posed by non-state armed actors, right? So there was this sense that state actors are not a threat anymore. It's non-state actors, terrorist organizations. Now I sometimes feel that we kind of have both, but that's another story. And in Kosovo, of course, the status process in 2006, 2007 took place at a time when the relationship between the United States, Europe, and Russia started to deteriorate. So you always have to look at the context in which Martti worked. And, there are parties, say in Russia, who are certainly not pleased with the peace in Kosovo. And there'll be parties elsewhere as well, but the bottom line was that Martti was always seen as a fair and honest broker. So let me conclude by noting that the most successful moments in Martti's career came at a time when we had more faith in global multilateral institutions and commonly agreed rules than we do today. And this is what the foreign minister was alluding to earlier. I think any time we are seeing a shift or a transition in a world order, which we are seeing now, as we saw after World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, there is a vacuum that emerges. So we know that the old order has died, but a new one has not been born yet. And when a power vacuum emerges, I'm not into physics, but I take your words at face value, someone is going to go and try to fill that vacuum. And I think we see that, Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, we see it in the Middle East in all different kinds of ways. And we see it in the African continent where there's so much external meddling coming into mediation from different types of interests and parties, whether it's in Sudan, South Sudan, Sahel, Ethiopia, Eritrea, etc., etc. And when you get mediation which is purely transactional and interest-based, it's very difficult to get results, And the big difference with Martti's time and today's time is that in Martti's time, there was a clear mandate. Martti had a mandate from the UN. Martti might have had a mandate from European partners or from the Americans and the Russians. And then he brokered the peace. But now it's these organizations and different types of people. And if I may, I make no reference, but some of the peace mediators in today's world are completely out of their depth, completely clueless about what peace really means. They don't even understand the basic concepts of the difference between a ceasefire and a peace agreement. So, I think we're in trouble. And in that sense, we need Marttis. We might draw a lot of lessons, but I think one of the lessons is that we need more UN, not less UN. And I would say that the lessons of Martti Ahtisaari are more important than ever. Martti never talked about the positions he held. He always talked about the tasks that he had been given and the need to treat people with dignity, to understand the limits and possibilities of the given context, and to find practical solutions to man-made problems are universal skills and qualities for anyone who is given the task to work for the common good. So long live Martti Ahtisaari's legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.